To remind all board meeting attendees that this meeting is being live streamed and archived for access at any time by our community members on the internet within 24 to 48 hours of the meeting's conclusion. And we'll start with the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Better chair. Safer.
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Witt.
Here.
Mr. Carey.
Here.
Mr. Lawler.
Here.
Mr. LePayton.
Here.
Mrs. Pavlak.
Here.
Mrs. Sparber.
Here.
And Mr. Rivas is absent.
Mr. Reeves is ill tonight. So with 6 members present, we do have a quorum. Are there any items the board members would like us to move from consent to new business?
Yes, please. I-5.
Okay. So we'll move I-5, the Kaneland John Stewart Elementary School Co-Teaching Pilot Program Report. That will now become J6.
How about
Any others?
2 or 3?
Okay.
That's too bad.
Hearing none, we'll move on. We're looking for approval of the agenda tonight then as amended with the item we just moved.
So moved.
And a roll call, please.
Mr. Carey.
Aye.
Mr. Lawler.
Aye.
Mr. LePayton.
Aye.
Mrs. Pavlak.
Aye.
Mrs. Sparber.
Aye.
Mrs. Witt.
Aye. Motion carries 6-0. Move on now to the board and superintendent salutes, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Lee.
Yes, thank you, President Witt. I have one tonight. Next week is Teacher Appreciation Week, May 7th to the 11th. So I'm going to take a minute to just share some of the information that we received. And in lieu of a formal resolution, we're just going to salute our teachers and share some of the language that we received as part of Teacher Appreciation Week. Teachers mold future citizens through guidance and education and encounter students of widely differing backgrounds. Our country's future depends upon providing quality education to all students, and teachers spend countless hours preparing lessons, evaluating progress, counseling, and coaching students in performing community service. Our community recognizes and supports its teachers in educating the children of the Kaneland community. The Kaneland Board of Education strongly encourages all members of the community to join us in personally expressing appreciation to our teachers for their dedication and devotion to their work. We can recognize them at #KanelandPride or #EducationalRockstars. And in addition to that, we would also like to share that, Friday night is our the Kane County Educator of the Year banquet, and a couple of our teachers will be recognized. And again, we've shared this information, but just as a review, classroom elementary teacher Katie Riley, classroom middle school educator Christy Kukovic, classroom high school educator Rachel Giles, early career educator Kyle Allman, educational support personnel, while not a teacher, as Teacher Appreciation Week, but Mona Fergus, and then also student support personnel, Miss Denise Michaels here at the high school. So then one last thing, our Kaneland Foundation, so it's kind of a salute / public service announcement. You should see this or may have seen this. This is our latest fundraising opportunity through the foundation. For a $10 donation, community members or peers can say thank you to a Kaneland staff member for $10. They'll receive a certificate and a balloon the last week of school. So I would like to take a second. If we have any teachers here, could you stand briefly so we can say thank you for your work? Briefly, thank you, teacher. Thank you. So thank you for your work, and we will see you Friday night, Educator of the Year banquet. That was all I had.
Okay.
Yes.
Also, shout out whoever put the foundation thing on the web store. It's very easy to use.
Very nice. I'll let her know.
Okay. Yes. Do you have any salutes, Dr. Fuchs? Any board members? Okay. Hearing none, we shall move on. This is the first opportunity for public comment. And board meetings are held to conduct the business of the Board of Education and are required by law to take place in public. However, they are not public forums. We use the public comment section as an opportunity to listen to our stakeholders. The board does not enter into debate or respond to questions during public comment. In most cases, concerns or questions requiring follow-up will be referred to the superintendent. If you choose to speak publicly, we ask that you stand, state your name and village of residence for the record, and limit your comments to 3 minutes or less so that all who wish to speak may have that opportunity. You are encouraged to seek a private appointment to discuss matters concerning individual students or staff members. That being said, the floor is now open for public comment. Are there any public comments? Okay, hearing none, I will close the floor to public comment. There will be another opportunity at the end of the meeting. Tonight's consent agenda contains the following action items: the approval of the accounts payable and payroll for April 2018, the approval of minutes of the April 9th, 2018 regular meeting, the approval of resignations and employment of staff, the approval of special education workload plan. It also includes the following informational items: the final 2017 tax extension report and the Freedom of Information Act FOIA request report. We're looking for a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended due to moving I-5 to J6.
So moved.
I'll second that. And a roll call, please.
Mr. Lawler.
Aye.
Mr. LePayton.
Aye.
Mrs. Pavlak.
Aye.
Mrs. Barber.
Aye.
Mrs. Witt.
Aye.
Mr. Carey.
Aye.
Motion carries 6-0. Move on now to new business. The first item is the approval of bids for summer 2018 projects.
Yes, I'll turn this, we do have two guests with us, Mr. Payton and Mr. Wolliver, but I'll turn it over to Dr. Fuchs, and she can walk us through it and see what questions you might have.
Thank you. So good evening. All of our bids came in for our summer projects last week, a week ago today, and we put together the recommendation for the board. Typically, once the projects have been approved and the bids come in as expected, we would have this item on consent agenda. But I wanted to point out to the board that the bids this year came in a little bit higher than our original estimate. So I wanted to make sure if the board had any questions, you had an opportunity to ask them. As you can see below, we had estimated costs of about $483,000, and our total bid amounts came in at $575,837. We do believe that all of the pricing is fair pricing, and our architect has checked references and reviewed with the low apparent bidder, and so we do feel comfortable asking the board to approve the bids as they came in. And knowing that we will need to put a little extra money in the operations and maintenance fund for 2018-19 to cover the overage.
Questions? Comments? Are you generally, is part of this just generally the economy's recovering a little bit, and so people
I think
charging more again?
Yep, I think it's a combination of that and a little underestimating, so a little bit of both.
Okay.
Yep. Some we were closer on than others.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, if not, we're looking for a motion that the Board of Education directs the administration to execute contracts for the summer projects as described above in the total amount of $575,837.26.
So moved.
I'll second that. Any other comments or questions? If none, we'll have a roll call, please.
Mr. LePayton.
Aye.
Mrs. Pavlak.
Aye.
Mrs. Barber.
Aye.
Mrs. Witt.
Aye.
Mr. Carey.
Aye.
Mr. Lawler.
Motion carries 6-0.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Mr. Payton and Mr. Wolliver for their time tonight. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on now. Yeah. All those questions.
Just in case.
Like, all right. Item J2 is next up, and that is the approval of student handbook changes on first reading.
Thank you.
Thank you. As you know, every year we bring to you recommendations for handbook changes and different things that have come down the pipe from various organizations. I can't really take full credit for all of these. The folks that can are sitting in the audience tonight, so Mr. West, Mr. Countryman, Mrs. Aversa, they're the ones that really did a lot of the heavy lifting behind this. Just by way of kind of reminder of how this process works, typically we review things like the Illinois Principals Association Model Student Handbook, We look at things that may have come through the press policies. We listen to suggestions from the Board of Education or the Citizens Advisory Committee. We take in kind of information from our staff, from our students. I think we rolled those in a little bit more at the high school level this year. And a team of teachers then meet along with our administrators and review those changes and talk about what those may be. We then take those changes to CAC for kind of a final, what do you think about these? And we bring them here to you to look at tonight and ask any questions that you may have. And then finally, they'll come back again in the future as a consent agenda item if you approve of them tonight, or if you have questions, we'll bring them at a future meeting to kind of talk about a little bit more. So that's an overview of the process. I don't have a fancy presentation for you tonight. I kind of sent these out ahead of time. A majority of these changes have to do with kind of aligning language to deal with what current practice might be, updating things like insurance information, things like that. There's not any really drastic overhauls except for possibly one of these, and one of those is what you kind of asked about last year, especially in regard to dress code. So I'll spend a little bit more time talking about that one tonight, and then questions you have about that or any of the other changes in here, I'd be happy to entertain those. So to give you a little bit of backstory on the dress code, I know last year there were some questions about kind of enforcement of that, where we get that from, why it's written the way that it is, and really a genuine desire to make sure that was inclusive language and didn't really reveal any sort of gender bias. So what we kind of undertook and tried to do this year was to talk to our staff, talk to our community, talk to our students, and see kind of what they thought about the dress code as it was. Some of the things that we learned were that the students themselves didn't have, in general, obviously I'm speaking in general, didn't have sweeping issues with the dress code. The staff themselves didn't either. There really didn't seem to be too many places in here where it was specifically written for either a male or a female student. I think what we did find is that some of the enforcement may have been what was different. And so one of the things you'll see as you look through this is the idea that we need to kind of readdress what we're kind of sharing with the staff, how we're training them on enforcing the dress code, not only in what it is, but then how also they confront students that may have violated the dress code, so that we know that it's self-expression, and how students dress, especially in their adolescent years, has a lot to do with how they see themselves. So if you approach students in a way that's less than inclusive, or that maybe is belittling, even if it's not intentional, I think it's a very touchy subject. So wanting to work with staff on how they approach those. If you do turn to, it's the same dress code language K through 12, so you can look at any point in your packet, but if you would turn to the kind of the second page and look under the elementary ones, it's for page number 10, dress code, you'll see the full language there. And I just wanted to kind of draw your attention to parts of that. Most of it's the same as what it has been. I think it's fair to say that this is likely going to be a process that goes beyond just this year. Already at the high school and even a little bit at the middle school, we've heard teachers and students that want to keep coming back to this and keep the conversation going. But I think that the steps that we've taken all have said these are the right steps in the way we want to go. One of the pieces that we added to our dress code, especially after looking at some of the other handbooks that are out in other schools, is kind of this preamble section. And I won't read it right at you, but it's the part that starts with Kaneland School District values students' rights to self-expression. The idea in including that was really to try to put out there what we do believe, and as best as our intentions may be, there may be something that we include or don't include sometime that we need to go back and change. I think we wanted to say at the very beginning, our goal is not to discriminate, our goal is not to propagate stereotypes, our goal is not to use this as a tool to kind of force people to fit a certain mold. Our goal is to be inclusive. Our goal is to have the dress code really be no more than a way to ensure that there's kind of an environment that's conducive to learning. I think all of us will probably kind of wind up on different ends of that spectrum, but some of the other work that we went through with this was designed to kind of remove any gender-specific language. It was designed to pay some heed to that training part. If you look further down the page, at the bottom, right towards the bottom of that page, if you're looking at the elementary one, it says all staff and security members review the dress code annually and are trained in the enforcement of the dress code. It's a part that we added in to really highlight that piece and codify it so that it's not something that we just like to have happen. It's definitely something that will happen. If you flip to the following page, another section that we added in there under number 4, when enforcing this rule, consideration will be made in regard to current fashion trends, and any specific allowances will be made clear to students and staff. I think it's hard to write a dress code that will never change because obviously fashion trends change overnight. So one of the things that we wanted to be able to do was to have some language that wouldn't necessarily have to be overhauled completely every single year, but also leave ourselves the option to say, let's use the peekaboo shirts. I learned that one last year, but let's use that as an example. that technically would break our dress code, but being that I don't think that's what the spirit of the dress code is meant to prohibit people from wearing. A group of, I think we need to put some process behind this, but the way we were kind of envisioning it would be a group of administrators, a group of teachers, a group of staff, or students, and possibly some community members at some point throughout the year talking about what is acceptable, what exceptions maybe want to make, and then moving forward from there. Another way you might see that play out, it's not in here anymore because we removed it, but there was language in here before that talked about ripped jeans, for example. It's pretty common to see students walking around in ripped jeans anymore. It's become just such a part of current fashion trends that we just removed it. So I think there's two ways that we can see that play out. Is we want to be able to have that authority to make a decision right on the spot and say these are the things that we want students to feel comfortable wearing and doing, but then we also want to be able to make the changes more formal down the road. Those are the biggest changes to the dress code policy. I'm sure that's probably where the most questions will kind of be tonight, so I'll kind of pause there and ask if there's any other questions about that, and then or anything else in the entire document that you have in front of you. I'd be happy to talk about those.
So I have a dress code question. So how, I'm a student, and how do I know what the definition of the middle of the body is?
Sure. So
because does that include, the shoulders were a big issue.
Sure,
you know,
sure.
Shoulders couldn't be bare before. Can they now because they're...
I think, so that's the part that we would talk about with the peekaboo shoulders, for example, but
Yeah.
this is, we're a bit off cycle right now, but every year we review the handbook and the language with students on the first day. We had said if there were any sweeping changes, we would do that again in the spring this year, so this would, even though there aren't massive changes, I still think kind of a reiteration would be worth it with students, but those are the sorts of things that we would want to hit with them. How do we interpret middle of the body? What are those rules that we're looking at this year that would say this is okay and this is not? We're going to stop short of doing a fashion show, but we definitely want to make sure students know if you come wearing these sorts of clothes, it's acceptable. If you don't, it's not. So that would be more of a conversation we'd have with them. We do that every year already. I think just really paying more attention to some of those specific pieces would be how would you address that.
I am so out of my depth here.
Go for it. I am too a little bit, so.
All right. Do the same requirements extend to sports activities?
Yes and no, so they should, but I think that's a place where the enforcement piece is kind of, see, he's gonna say no, but don't listen to him. That's a piece where I think our enforcement has gotten a little more lax. So for example, like, it's gonna be 80 degrees tomorrow, I would guess if you came by the high school, you'll see some male students running with their shirts off. Or you may see some female students running in an apparel that we wouldn't want them wearing to school that day.
Well, I guess that's my question, because I've seen girls wearing tank tops that are low on the sides, and the sports bra is very obvious.
Right.
But that's okay for sports, but not okay for
No,
class?
I think that's where our enforcement needs to be stepped up. So please don't undercut me right here, whatever you're doing back there. I think
They're
that.
not allowed to wear shirts running around school.
Yeah.
They have to wear a shirt.
Yeah. So they're supposed to be following the same rules, but like I said, there's.
I think I missed what, with the tank top on, you can still see the sports bra. Is that okay or not? And where is that okay or not?
What do you think, sir? I know that it's not supposed to be, but how have you been enforcing it?
Case by case.
So, but the short answer truly is I know that's a weak spot for the high school, for example. So when we talk about enforcing and training people, I think part of the problem is we don't have as many staff around after school, so it's harder to see them. We have to work with our coaches. We have to make sure they're also aware of the dress code. That's why one of the reasons why we added in that specific line about training and then enforcement. We need to step that up a little bit. And if it is going to be different, then we need to make sure that it's codified that way so that it's not a question of, well, what about after school or about during? I think you could make the same, prom was this weekend. I think if we could probably make the same argument if we had gone to prom, there were probably some things that we wouldn't let go in the halls of our school for both genders. So if we want to make it so that we have very clear, specific expectations for different settings, I think that's a route we would go down. Right now, we want to try to enforce the same dress code as much as possible in every setting. And we just have to get better at doing that.
Okay, I guess I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other as long as it's consistent.
And I think that's that consistency piece is where it's added. Those places where it's not consistent, making sure that it's not just by chance. We're aware of it and we've made it, but that's okay.
Okay.
And consistent, so in the sports, and I think Peter said, they're supposed to be wearing their shirts. They're not supposed to be running without shirts.
Right.
You've got to be sure that if you're going to consequence the sports bra, you're going to consequence the no shirt.
Exactly.
I mean, it's
Right.
just,
Yeah.
I think that's the most
I agree.
The enforcement is just the biggest picture, as you've said.
Yeah, and I think when you get a group of staff or students, like their first react is to think about during the school day, and so some of the stuff I think just gets lost in the shuffle. But we've definitely acknowledged that, and I think that was clear even after last year that that's a place where we really need to make sure everybody that's tasked with enforcing these rules knows what they are, knows how to have the conversations, and if it becomes an issue, if we have students overheating, for example, then we need to talk about what that is and do we put exceptions in? Right now, there aren't any, so there shouldn't be any. But should, it's not reality sometimes, so we have to get better.
Thank you.
Others?
Doing a good job.
I am, because I've just been interested before.
You guys don't know I hate dress codes. So when you reference that underwear and undergarments must not be seen at any time, so I don't know your name, but I see you're wearing a T-shirt. I see the white top of your T-shirt within the collar of your button-down shirt. Is that showing an undergarment?
By the technical sense, I would suppose that it is. But so maybe that's a place where we have to come and make it clear. Because you're right, and I didn't think of that until right now. So.
That was the one that jumped out at me when I just read that was, so for everybody who wears a T-shirt underneath their shirt, we're going to make some potential violation there.
Sure. So, again, this is first reading, and perhaps that's a place where we can come back and make it a little clearer so that we aren't filling up the offices with
T-shirts and things. I mean, it easily steps into the world of ridiculous. But I appreciate the intent to try to make this inclusive. I think those conversations around training and consistency and how this stuff is enforced, not just after school with sports, but in the building by different teachers, I think is probably where the real work is going to come. And I appreciate the effort that's gone in to try to have that dialogue. Because I think that conversation is what's important.
I think so, too.
I think more so than the actual garb which is being worn. So. I agree.
I'm assuming that bra straps fall in the same category.
That would be undergarments, yeah. So but that's the difference. There's a difference probably between a bra strap and a V-neck T-shirt. So how do we make that so that's clear for people, you know? Or not.
I would argue that there isn't a difference.
Didn't mean to step in it there again. But some might, so we would want to make sure that it's clear to everyone. That's all I was trying to say.
And then, you know, if there's a fashion trend that is a sheer shirt over a sports bra, I mean, you say you're going to update it according to fashion, take those into account.
Yeah. Well, that's why I think
so you would then just have a conversation about that and make a decision at that time.
And that's the piece. I don't know that there's process in this as much as policy, but I think that's the piece that we're going to have to, like, if that's what we want to do, it can't just be at the whim of someone's discretion. There has to be some formal process that we do to actually talk about that, whether it's, you know, right before school starts, do we bring some people together? Do we use the student advisory council in that regard? Do we do it a couple times throughout the year? But I'd hate for it to just be whatever, because you won't want me making fashion decisions either. I'm not, look at me. So there's got to be some collective group of people that can make those decisions and then say, is it okay or is it not? And I would imagine that, and again, it's procedure, less policy, but we'd want to keep you guys in the loop on that as well. So if there were going to be some like official exceptions, just at least putting them, if not in a consent agenda or a board update, even coming in the year and saying, here's just so you're in the loop and you know what's going on in your buildings, this is what we're telling our students. So.
And there was student input on this.
So Josh met with a lot of our students and talked to them. It was definitely more at the high school this year than some of our lower levels, but that's where we started, and we always have room to improve. I think we can do better. And you know, as he met with them, the idea was, this is good, but let's keep talking about it. And so I think you'll continue to see us bringing this back. I know Josh has plans to kind of even do a more kind of in-depth overhaul of our handbook over the next few years. Like, kudos to this team again this year, because with very minimal guidance from me, they were able to do as much as they could, and they're all in their first year working with something like this. So I think they did an awesome job and really worked well with their teams and their buildings and the students that they worked with. So thank you guys for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do political things, you're talking about clothing that advertise drugs, alcohol, or tobacco, does that include political?
Political doesn't tend to be something that we would say you can or cannot do unless it's using swear words or something that's completely inappropriate. Usually we allow students to do that. I mean, it's kind of a case-by-case basis. So if you look in here, there still is language that allows an administrator to make that judgment call, but typically we're not shutting things down for political reasons. Say it, yeah.
So, some people might consider a Confederate flag political, while others consider it hate
This is true.
speech. So what will you consider?
Well, I think that's in here, if it's talking about vulgar, obscene, violent messages on clothing. So far, we haven't had that specific topic come up, but we've typically deal with that with the individual students and talk about what that means to people and why that could be inflammatory. And again, this has been a while since we've actually had it come up, but that's usually enough to have that conversation and to be able to talk about it. Not to my knowledge, at least in the time I've been here, have we had to say you can't do this because of the dress code. It's more, just like we would with any sort of our disciplinary policy, it's that conversation and how is this impacting the people around you. So yeah, there's that and a million other things that could come into this category, but I think those ones that aren't specifically outlined here, it's typically those conversations with students that help us get through those. If that became a massive issue for us, we would figure that out and put that in here.
Thank you for indulging my
Oh,
questions.
it's my job. I like to enjoy it.
Anything else from anyone? Okay. So if there are no further questions, we're looking for a motion that the Kaneland Board of Education approve the proposed student handbook changes on first reading.
So moved.
I'll second it. Oh, Sean seconded. And a roll call, please.
Mrs. Pavlak.
Aye.
Mrs. Barber.
Aye.
Mrs. Witt.
Aye.
Mr. Carey.
Aye.
Mr. Lawler.
Aye.
Mr. LePayton.
Aye.
Motion carries 6-0.
Thank you.
Move on to, thank you very much.
Thank you,
Move
Mr.
on
Rice.
Thank you.
to item J3, which is the update of the Kaneland High School Conference affiliation.
Yes, I'd like to introduce, or not introduce, you know Mrs. Maris, but I'd like to welcome Mrs. Maris and bring her up to present. As you know, during last school year, we had news that our current conference was going to be dissolving in 2 years. So this is year one of the two. So next year that you'll hear from Mrs. Maris, we are still part of that conference, but part of what the conversation is tonight is looking at potential options moving forward and what those options may look like. And Mrs. Maris, and thanks to Mr. Goff, also has put together a comprehensive study of a few options, and I'll provide an update. So thank you, Mrs. Maris.
Awesome, thank you. And before I get started, let me just let you know that we had a phenomenal prom on Saturday night, and although the dress code wasn't completely followed, it was a very classy night. We had a lot of fun. So, and no issues all night long. I woke up on Saturday or Sunday morning and no text, no email, so it was an awesome evening.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Let me also start by saying a huge thank you to Peter, because over these last 4 years, he has taught me a great deal about athletics and has helped me to understand the ins and outs of conferences and the impacts that they have. And so thank you. I'm going to speak on behalf of both of us this evening, but he's done a great job of getting me ready, especially during this transition, and you will be missed, my friend. So thank you. I'm going to start with what we have right now. You can see here and on your chart just an average of our sizes and our distances. And so what we're used to competing is pretty much close to the middle of the road and an average distance of about 92 miles round trip. We are talking with you tonight about two options that are hanging out there, and one is the I-8, and basically what you would find on the I-8 is that it's predominantly the same group of people that we have been working with now, with the addition of Sandwich and Plano, who have been added, and because of them being added on more of the smaller size, you're going to see that our average size of enrollment, and actually the distance as well, is getting a little bit lower. And then the other option that I'm going to talk to you about tonight.
Can you scoot just a little?
Yes.
Either
Should I
way,
move
so
the
they can
mic?
see the screen behind you.
Yeah, go ahead. Can I move the mic?
Yes. No.
Thank you.
Okay.
Are you good?
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay, so if you
Looking
can
at
see
numbers.
on the bottom of each one of these slides, that's where you're going to see the average for both the sizes of the school as well as the distance.
Okay, now you didn't add Kaneland's number in there, so, right?
Ours is 1350.
1350.
The one I put in there is DeKalb.
Okay.
Because that's who is trying to come in for this time with us.
Okay.
Good catch, though. Okay. Any questions about those sizes of the comparisons of the three different districts?
Could you go back to the last slide for just a minute? It was pretty quick. So we would be the
One of the bigger schools.
Well, us and Ottawa would be relatively close.
And so that's obviously something that this conference is watching too. They do realize that we're on more of the top end of it, and they're kind of watching to see how large we think that we're going to be getting to.
Thank you.
So on the next slide, what I'd like to do is just kind of talk through the two different options that are in front of us right now. The Interstate 8, so we will finish up the rest of this year in our current conference. We will do all of next year in our current conference. And so this is really talking about simply for the year 1920. And the Interstate 8 has offered us an agreement to join them for one additional year. As during that one additional year, they would be continuing to look for options for themselves while we would have the opportunity to look for options. A year from now, or a year from actually, well, in April, they have guaranteed that they would let us know one way or the other whether or not there's a long-term commitment that they'd be willing to make with us. But for right now, they're simply talking about offering us the 1 year. The benefits of staying with the Interstate 8 is that they are closer for us. It does guarantee us a conference for that 1920 year, and also the opportunity to be considered for an extension. It's an established relationship, not only with our athletics, but also our activities and our clubs. We get together with them on a regular annual basis, along with the activity directors. And when we go to compete at any of those schools, we know who they are. We know what to expect. You pull up to the building, you know what door to go in. Some of that just common familiarity that is a comfort for us. The downside of this is really just that it's the 1 year commitment. And so if we commit to them for one more year, where does that leave us a year from now? When you look at the NIC-10, this is a conference that's been around for a great deal of time. The consistency of the district, the ones that have been with them for a long time, and they are potentially offering us a long-term relationship. But it is a greater travel distance from here to those schools. So here's where we truly are right now. The Interstate 8 has offered us the 1 year commitment. They had asked for us to let them know whether or not we were going to accept that by the end of this month. I let them know that we were going to be sharing with you tonight. And then there's some movement with the NickTen, and so they have given us permission to give them an answer to that 1 year contract on Thursday of this week. In the meantime, the NickTen came down to visit us last week. Was it on Wednesday, I think it was? They did a tour of our facilities, both inside and outside. We spent about 2 hours talking through with them what we offer. It was mostly our sharing with them. It was not us receiving from them. So we shared all of that. They have invited us to go out and give a formal presentation to them on Wednesday at 11. And then they will be meeting together that evening to make a decision on whether or not they're willing to offer us a contract later on Wednesday evening. They would be contacting us. At the same time, they're doing the same thing with DeKalb. So on Wednesday, they started at DeKalb, and then they came here. And on this coming Wednesday, they will be doing the same thing. So they're kind of looking at the two schools potentially joining together is what they're looking at. We have talked with all of our head coaches right now. The feeling is that they would prefer probably just to stay with the Interstate 8. That's kind of where we're leaning for now, just because of the comfort, but also knowing that there is a risk with that a year out if we were to choose to go that route. So that's kind of where we are. Questions, input, feedback that you want to pass on to us at this point?
Mrs. Mercer, is there a cost? Do we have an idea of what cost differences will be? You said there'd be some differences in travel and that kind of thing, so
Yeah.
is there a cost difference between the two conferences?
As far as joining, have they given us?
In every conference where we're in NIB-12, we have to pay a fee that helps, do everything.
Sorry, Mr. Goff, I don't mean to cut you off. I meant more like the cost difference, because if the district is bigger and we're traveling in different ways, and then
So besides the gas.
I understood that there's, I understand the fee.
In all actuality, you saw with the NIB-12 and the NickTen, there's only a difference of like 4 miles through the NickTen.
Okay.
So a lot of the travel would be the same because you have like outliers like Geneseo and Freeport.
Okay.
So, but then you still have those schools with the Belvedere's and DeKalb and Rockford Jefferson's on the southwest or southeast side and stuff like that. So it's only different 4 miles.
Okay.
Do we have a problem with the way that Interstate 8 is kind of treating us? It seems a little bit like you can join, but you're not going to be a fully vested member. Do we have a problem with that? I mean, it seems, I don't know anything about it. I mean, maybe that's the way it always is, or maybe that's, I
Do
mean.
you want to share the specifics of maybe what they originally shared with us and then what they've changed in their view of what rights we have as we come in for the proposed year?
And I think it's fair to say on their behalf, they're trying to figure out what they're going to be as a conference. So they're figuring out all of their bylaws and things as we're going through this process too. Originally, when they made the offer, it was going to be for 1 year, and we would not be able to be eligible for any conference titles. That was even more difficult to swallow, and so went back to them and said, that doesn't seem right. If we're a member of the conference, even if it's for 1 year, it should be a full-fledged membership. And it was about a month ago, I think, that Dr. Layden and Peter Goff went to meet with them to speak on our behalf and said we weren't comfortable with that, and they did agree to come back and give us full rights for that 1 year. And along with that, the membership, the commitment that they would let us know by April of 2019 what their intentions were long-term. So before the contract even starts, they would let us know whether it was just for the 1 year or long-term.
And then voting rights other than who they're going to include as possible schools for conference expansion. So that's really the only voting right that we won't have for the 1920 school year.
So actually, in the Interstate 8, according to the numbers that you have on the enrollment and whatnot, Ottawa's the only school that's larger than we are. Right?
Small.
Well, they got 1375, and we've got 1350. But all the rest of the schools are actually smaller than ours. And some of those schools we've already have been used to playing.
All of these we've played this year, correct?
Yeah.
Yep.
And I would assume it comes down to how well we did against them during that year. That's part of the reason it's a 1 year trial. Is that part of it?
That's part of it, and also I think there's probably some schools within that conference that are on the smaller side that if they had their druthers, they might have a school of 900 rather than a school of 1350.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the things, and they were very honest about that when they shared that. They said that year that it was helpful for us so we could continue to look for something that maybe is a better fit for us, and they also felt the same thing, that they would take that time. And they said, well, it's no poor indication of what they feel about Kaneland. In a way, while it's not the best compliment in the world, it was somewhat complimentary because we feel you guys are going to come in and you're going to beat some of us pretty good. So that's one thing to have that solid school, but another thing to be the person and the recipient of a number of those losses, that why they wanted to continue to still try to look.
And the same in reverse would be for the NickTen, because most of those schools are larger than we are.
So if we stay or go to the Interstate 8 for 1 year, do we lose the potential to move to the NI, whatever the following?
Potentially, we don't know what that will look like a year from now.
And DeKalb is basically trying to do the same thing that we are, going to get into one or the other, is our understanding of the...
Well, and right now, DeKalb, Kaneland, and Yorkville are all looking for a conference.
And we don't have Yorkville on here, do we?
Right.
No.
Yorkville's
And we still don't
looking
know, based on the presentation on Wednesday, May 2nd, whether or not there's even an invite coming from the NickTen. We don't know that one yet. That's why we were asking to put off any response to the Interstate 8 until after that meeting, just so that we can continue to explore as many options for ourselves as we can.
So we don't know whether we'll have an offer and what that offer will even be.
Any idea which direction or where Yorkville may be looking for? No? Okay.
It's a big chess game going on
Yes,
out
it
there
is.
right now.
So start your own conference. Oh, I was being sarcastic. I said, start your own conference.
You said the coaches are.
I was going to ask that,
more
but I
in
wasn't
line-
going to be sarcastic. Sorry.
You said the coaches are more in line with the I8.
Yeah. There's a comfort level for them. There's a partnership with some of those coaches and a real alliance with them.
I don't think is it a possibility to start our own conference, or with the 4 other schools that are in search of homes?
I think over the last couple of months, everything and anything has seemed like a possibility. It's really hard to predict what the future is gonna bring.
I guess we would have to kind of be more proactive if that's something that we'd want to do as far as reactive and wait for an invitation. So I guess that begs the question, have we seriously thought about trying to organize our own conference?
Yes, those are conversations that are ongoing regularly. That is part of the attractive piece of the Interstate 8 is that it does give us that flexibility to continue to look. And while the Interstate 8 may be a long-term resting spot for us, it might be a great conference in the future, but with them making it clear that they're going to continue to look for that for a lot of next year, they've made it clear that you guys should do the same thing. And so as Kaneland, we would continue to do that, and they have been doing that. Peter probably stops by twice a week and says, hey, I just talked to these different schools, I don't want to name them, but they talk to these different schools, and what are they thinking, and what are these different conferences doing? Because conferences tend to have anywhere from a 4 to 6 year shelf life. They kind of regather, everybody's kind of happy, but then somewhere along the line, either somebody doesn't have enough competition, somebody else doesn't do well enough, and then things sometimes splinter. So that's a conversation that we'll have and have been having that's ongoing.
So at this point, you need us to do nothing?
Right, it's mostly an update, and then we'll bring you some more information at our next board meeting as to what happens over this week.
You made a comment that we've tended to do well against some of these other schools in that conference. Is that primarily in football, that we're more equal in other sports, or do we tend to dominate those other schools in other sports as well?
Do you want to speak to that?
I mean, football, a lot of it is, we don't want to play you in football. Those weeks 1, 2, and 3, constantly looking, and now we're playing bigger schools, so we don't have that as much now. But I think everything, I think it's all pretty, we're good in wrestling, and then, track and cross country, and it's just everyone has their sports, and for pretty much we're knocking on the door to everybody.
What about like activities and club sponsors? Have you gotten any feedback from them?
Not a lot, because we don't have any information really from NickTen yet, so that would be the next spot to just see if there's an offer there, what all do they offer on that end.
Do you think that information will come together rapidly enough for you to give an answer to Interstate 8?
Yeah, I think so.
Thank you, Mrs. Mayor.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on now to J4, which is the approval of policies from press on first reading.
Yep, and you probably noticed in the updates that I shared a new format was coming, and this is the new format.
Can you ask them to go back to the old format?
Beth and I did try that, and there was no response, bad connection kind of thing. So basically what you'll find is the comments and questions. It used to be the comments and options in the past. Now it's comments and questions, and they're at the end of each policy. So in the policy itself, you'll see a little comment where it'll say press, or it'll say press number 1 is kind of a placeholder, and then at the actual end of the policy is where it'll say press +1. That corresponds to the comments. The other thing you'll see is that some have comments and questions, or some just have comments. So what we'll do is I'll just kind of go through these 4, reiterate some of those changes, share some of the highlights, and then if you have questions, feel free to ask those questions. As you'll see in both 260 and 520, both of those are similar in a number of ways. And press shared that was intentional so that the workplace harassment and the uniform grievance procedure have a number of the same steps and mandates in place, and even the law is the same in a number of those. So in the first one, if you'll go to, unless you have questions, I'll go to where I'm going to share a couple comments on page 5.
Page 5.
Which is where it has attorney reviewing. The question here was, how broad do we want to make that comment? My guess is that we want to make sure that it's broad enough to cover both state, federal, and board. So I'm waiting to hear back from Maureen, and so if it's something different than what's recommended here, I'll make sure I update you guys, because again, it comes back in consent at the second meeting, or at the next meeting, so I'll make sure I give that information and what it's going to look like, just in case you have questions on it. Then on the next, go ahead. I'm sorry, was there?
No.
Then the next one, the resolution. We do have to do a resolution. The reason we have to do a resolution, as I discussed with Maureen, she said most of the governmental agencies don't just adopt policy like we do with the school code. They usually do resolutions, and so when they made this law, they said resolution, so we do have to do a resolution, and you'll see that is also included in here. That's what the resolution will look like, and we'll do that at the next meeting and have President Witt and Mrs. Pavlak sign off on those. And then the Press Plus, and this same one on page 6, Press Plus 3 and 4 are both legal changes, law updates. Then you'll see on the next one, the first time that we have the new format where it says question on 440 incurring debt on the second page, which is page 8 of that policy. You'll see question 1, 2, and 3. For question 1, then our recommended answer is superintendent or designee, because that's a language you use primarily throughout the rest of our board policy, so that stays consistent. And then Dr. Fuchs and I looked at questions 2 and 3 and recommended yes to both of those, because that is the language that is recommended in the updated press policy. Next one, page 10, which is policy 520, workplace harassment. You'll see a number of the comments. And the comments on page 14, Press Plus 1, is the resolution is coming. We do have to do the resolution, which is the first comment. The second one, we use GCN modules as our compliance piece for that comment. And then Press Plus 3 and 4 are just updating other law and statute changes. And again, as you look back and forth, you'll see that our non-discrimination coordinator and complaint managers, Dr. Mumm, Mr. Rice, and then Mrs. Eggleston is our non-discrimination coordinator. They match in both of those, and a lot of the language is the same. And then pages 16 and 17, or actually 15 is the resolution. So that's the resolution that we'll have updated with our name in the middle inserted, and then places for President Witt and Mrs. Pavlak to sign at the next board meeting. And then the last one, policy 5200. That one in the comment was, an edit was inadvertently left out, so it's just updating a legal edit, which is legal reference 105.5-1019. So they're just updating it to make sure it's up to date. So for these, you'll see coming on second reading, and then we'll have the resolution in the next board packet, or the next board meeting that we're required to have. And that law changed January 15th of this year, and school districts just now that are getting their board packets or their press packets are getting those updated to be compliant.
I'm actually surprised that school districts are not required to train employees regarding
Yeah.
workplace harassment.
Me too.
That surprised me.
And we do it, we have out of the GCN modules, I think Mr. Atkins might know better, but I think there's 8 of them or 7 of them that we do. We do 2 or 3 every single year, and then the other 4 or 5 we alternate, 2 or 3 every other year to be in compliance. and they've changed over the year. And actually, Maureen Lemon, our board attorney, has written a few of those GCN modules. So that's her work. So we can thank her when we sit and do those modules year after year.
I have kind of a generic question.
Yes.
On page 2 of this document, I guess,
Okay.
it says, for any complaint alleging blah, 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 cyberbullying. Where did it, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong, I lost my spot. There's something that referenced cyberbullying.
Page 2, you are right.
Page 2.
It's in the middle.
Right, you know.
Under filing complaint.
Yes,
Second
thank you. So if some kid on his home computer threatens another kid down the street at 2 o'clock in the morning, does that fall under the jurisdiction of this document?
It does and it doesn't. If it brings any change or harm or impact into the district, then it would, but it's also something that families should contact the local authorities. But if we do see that there's an impact in the school and our students in the school day, then we can. We do act on it.
Define impact for me, please, a little bit more.
If there ends up being threats made that could be carried out at school. So if the threat's made at home, that tomorrow I'm going to get you during lunch. Or
Okay.
if the threats just stay cyber and they stay separate from our school, we may contact the kids and talk to them about it, but we may not have any legal implication or any legal grounds to do anything. But
Okay.
if somehow they bring the school into it, they bring the bus, cafeteria, school, then we can do something.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Is this section just for employees, though, or is this covering students?
It would be students also.
It would be students also.
Yes. It'd be the same thing if students come in and have a complaint.
About another student?
Yes. That's more of the bullying, student bullying. That's always a fine line, as we try to respect their rights, but then also when they bring it into the school, then it has an impact. Any other questions other than not a fan of the new format?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay, and then just the other thing too, just for your information, it's all done online now. So once we make our changes, as you can see where it says yes or no in the recurring debt, we will actually go in there and it has drop-down options. We just go and hit the drop-down options and do it. So while this may be more cumbersome, the first couple times Beth and I worked through it might be a little bit of a challenge, but it's going to be easier in the long run and more efficient on the back end because they don't send these in writing anymore, or they don't send these as a paper copy. It's all generated on our own now.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, we are looking for a motion that the Kaneland Board of Education approve the recommended policy changes, updates, the following recommended policy changes and updates on first reading. 2260, the uniform grievance procedure. 440, incurring debt. 520, workplace harassment prohibited. 520E, resolution to prohibit sexual harassment. And 5200, which is terms and conditions of employment and dismissal.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
And a roll call, please.
Mrs. Barber.
Aye.
Mrs. Witt.
Aye.
Mr. Carey.
Aye.
Mr. Lawler.
Aye.
Mr. LePayton.
Aye.
Mrs. Pavlik.
Aye.
Motion carries 6-0. The next item on new business is J5, the approval of a donation.
Yeah, I would like to share a donation from the Coley family, who has 3 students at John Shields. John Shields had a recent field trip, and then at field trip, they have matching T-shirts that say Kaneland John Shields on them. It's all the same color. As you go on field trips, you go to the zoo, Great America, you always see groups of students and chaperones with the same color to identify their students more easily. The Coley family recently saw those shirts, and after 15 years of doing their service for Kaneland John Shields, they believe maybe it was time for some updated shirts and would like to donate the $1,922 so that John Shields could get new shirts for field trips.
Very nice.
It's
Very
a
nice.
wonderful donation, and teachers and chaperones really appreciate it when they can look for all yellow or orange or pink or whatever the color might be on the shirts.
They'll do that in all schools.
We need the Coley family to be at all of our schools, don't we? Yeah. So if you approve that, we'll make sure we send a note of appreciation to the family, and maybe even take a picture of a bunch of our students with their shirts on when the first time they use them on a field trip.
Okay, so we're looking for a motion that the Kaneland Board of Education accept the donation of field trip T-shirts to Kaneland John Shields Elementary School from the Coley family, valued at $1,922.
So moved.
Second.
And a roll call, please.
Mrs. Barber.
Aye.
Mrs. Witt.
Aye.
Mr. Carey.
Aye.
Mr. Lawler.
Aye.
Mr. LePayton.
Aye.
Mrs. Pavlik.
Aye.
Motion carries 6-0. And our last item on new business is the previous I-5, which is the Kaneland John Stewart co-teaching pilot update. And Mr. Carey pulled that to new business, so I'll let you.
Thank you. I pulled it for a couple just bigger policy reasons, and then this program specifically, when it came through last year, I voted against it. It's just so everyone's aware. And the recommendation is to continue the program, and I guess my questions are, this says that there isn't any data to determine whether the policy or the pilot is good, bad, or indifferent. So my questions are, when will we see said data, and how will we evaluate this program, and when? So we did it for a year, but we don't have any data, or maybe the data is coming at the end of the school year. I don't know, but I want more information, please, on how we're going to decide if we continue to do this or get rid of it.
Yep, I invited Mrs. Eggleston and Mrs. Garland from John Stewart, anticipating a few questions, and I'm sure they can tag team and answer them accordingly at the microphone.
Okay, so data questions we can kind of address first. You sort of answered your own question there a little bit, is we do have our post-data assessments that are coming up now. We've had one grade level that's done their writing assessment, and then we have our data days coming up just at the end of May. So we should have all of our end of the year academic data. What we're hoping to find is that through co-teaching, we've been able to provide students with the same rate of growth in a general education setting versus having to remove them from their non-disabled peers. So that's ideally what we want to do, is see that post data coming in, compare it to the other 3 elementary schools, and see that we're having students progress at the same rate through the co-teaching structure as we do in a resource model.
And I don't mean to beat up on you guys.
Sure,
it's more
no.
of a big policy question of, it's a pilot, so why are we not seeing this after their data is collected over the summer to determine whether or not we renew it for the next year?
Because it will allow, part of the idea was to do it now, so that way the planning that we have at the end of the school year, while we still have the teachers in place, while we still have the teachers in the building, they can do that work and that planning over the next month prior to getting into summer when they won't have as much time together.
So what if the data says this is a horrible idea? I'm not saying that it does or
Sure.
that it is. It's just, what if our data comes back in a negative connotation?
Yep, so part of what we do have right now is quarterly benchmark updates for IEP goals, and what we do see is that we do have students that are progressing in their IEP specific goals in the same rate that they have been previously. So typically we have 60 to 75% of the students every quarter are making their IEP goals. We have that level of consistency with special education students now. What we don't have is pre-post are all of the students, gen ed and special ed, making that same level of progress. And so that's what we kind of need for the end of the year. But do we have enough anecdotal evidence right now outside of that academic data to say that there's value in progressing forward? That we certainly have. So beyond reading performance, math performance, writing performance, what we do have is the rate of independence that students are able to demonstrate in the general education setting. We know that we have 2 students who have progressed away from needing paraprofessional support. One student decreased 100% and another another student by 50%. That's something that's only been experienced, to my knowledge, at John Stewart in the co-teaching model. At the other 3 elementaries where it is still a resource pull-out type of model, students are highly dependent, well, to varying degrees. Highly is probably an unfair word, but to varying degrees dependent on paraprofessional support when they're in the general education setting, where we have seen our students decrease the need for that support. So a little bit, you're asking, I think, specifically for the academic data, which I think is quite fair in of a request. That's what we don't truly have yet. What we do have are general education and special education teachers planning together, assessing together, trying new approaches within reading instruction. We have a 3rd grade team that's implementing individual reading conferences as a result of something happening in another grade level. So that professional development we were hoping to see embedded when we have gen ed and special ed coming together, those are the things that we see changing that we know are beneficial. Our special education teachers have become better teachers as a result of watching and planning and reflecting with general education and vice versa. Unfortunately, that's not a number that we can say that they're 17% better because they're working together. Some of that is the anecdotal evidence that's coming along that we feel is giving the value to continuing the program. So we have teachers that are asking, can we go and spend time? Can I go watch them co-teach together? Can we be evaluated together? Can we do these things together? And then seeing teachers take risks in ways that we haven't seen them taking before. A little bit of our conversation is that specifically because of co-teaching? We think so, but we don't really have a black and white way to say they're collaborating in what I feel are better and more effective ways. Is that solely due to co-teaching? I'm not sure. They certainly have a lot more time to spend together, and they're using it to support both gen ed and special ed students. That wasn't happening before co-teaching came to John Stewart, so you know, I am attributing a lot of that to that success. So that's a lot of my rationale for moving forward, is I philosophically want to educate kids in a gen ed environment whenever possible, least restrictive whenever possible, give them those opportunities to learn alongside their peers whenever possible. And the co-teaching model is allowing us to do that.
I'm not opposed to her. I mean, sounds like it's working well, but I guess I want more. Tell, not necessarily right this second, but please tell me how we're going to evaluate this and when we're going to decide if it expands, contracts. That's what I'm looking for more so.
So I guess our plan at the end of the year is to pull that post data once we have all of that, which won't be till the end of May that we have that information available from John Stewart. Over the summer, we'll have that information from all of the buildings compiled together that we'll be able to spend some time over the summer comparing the 4 buildings and seeing is there more growth, the same growth, less growth, whatever that happens to show. From what we know informally in conversation it seems pretty consistent at the moment. It doesn't seem that co-teaching in and of itself has done so much more academically, but it has allowed students to be just as successful without being removed from their classrooms. So we're going to look at all of that data over the summer. We'll collect our pre-data again in the fall and continue to monitor those benchmarks. So ideally, we would like to have a recommendation by the end of next year, whether that's you have to do co-teaching. I don't know, I guess, that we'll ever come to the point where we're able to stand before you and say co-teaching is the one and only model that works to support students with special needs. I think what we're going to do is say this is a really effective model along a continuum of different types of models that help students.
That we want to be able to offer our students.
Right. Our most recent conversations, just as of last Wednesday, really talked about even a continuum of services. We do still have students at John Stewart that, for a part of their day, they do receive more of a resource environment. That individual student needs that resource environment. It's working for him in ways that co-teaching wasn't able to. We also have a few situations where it's a bit more of a push-in model, that the teachers aren't necessarily co-teaching. They don't have the common plan time together, the common reflection time, but they do push in and deliver their services within that environment. And then the majority of the teams are doing full-fledged co-teaching. But all of those have benefits and all of those have drawbacks. I think the trick really is figuring out which kids respond to which method. So I think we're even ourselves working a little bit to not pigeonhole staff into having one option for delivering services to what is such a wide, there's 13 different eligibility categories for special education. Within those, even there's a multitude of abilities within each of those categories. They're so vastly different. I don't anticipate that we're going to come to a point where we say co-teaching is the only way to service special education students. Is it one method that should be an option for students that demonstrate growth in that setting? For sure. So we're going to look at the academic data. We're going to see that. We would like to be able to talk about what characteristics of students really do benefit from being within their gen ed setting, which do require more of a pull-out. It's just really hard to identify this type of student because they all just keep being so darn different, and everybody responds differently. So we are leaning a bit more towards looking at this continuum of opportunities for students within special education services that meets all of their needs. To do that, we need the rest of our academic data. We need to continue to collect the anecdotal information that we've started to collect this year from students and staff. That's what we had shared last time, all of which has been positive from students as well as staff. And continue to work out a little bit of the kinks, scheduling, logistics. How do we get that time for common plan time when they're servicing multiple grade levels and things like that?
What I'd also like to share is on behalf of the co-teachers in Laura's building, they did come to the district's special ed monthly meeting back in March and presented to the special ed staff in regards to the successes that they're seeing and the benefits that they're seeing. And while I wasn't sure exactly what questions that you were posing to us tonight, but I did bring the information, the PowerPoint that they had shared with the special ed staff. They indicated that there was a deeper understanding of curriculum. They felt like there was a deeper understanding of various intervention strategies from both gen ed and special ed. They felt like there was a sense of belonging for kids, more connections with all students, not just students with special education or just students in gen ed. And then in the moment interventions for functional skills, so while the special education teachers in the gen ed environment, they are able to bring into functional skills interventions while those things are happening in the general education classroom. And then overall, they also shared about that there was strength in the relationship between their colleagues as well. So this is information that helps us understand what they're thinking, but we also know that we need to bring back to you some data. And that's exactly what Laura was talking about in regards to the information that we're looking to collect toward the end of this year, which is fairly soon.
What we could recommend would be in the summer when you meet, upon getting all your data, putting all that together, putting something together that we can send to the board and not only just show some of the year one data, but also what some of the benchline information might be as we're going into year two. Because many times you see a pilot program, and sometimes it's a true pilot program, you are learning to grow, but there's other times when it's a pilot program and most people are like, well, it's a pilot program, we know it's going to eventually expand, but what we'd like to do is make sure that we have those, the results and then any future data targets and benchmarking so that we do have that so we know exactly what we're looking at and some of the criteria that's going to be used for possible expansion down the road.
Are you looking, or are you doing this just on one grade level, or are you doing it on all five?
Kindergarten through fifth grade, yeah. And I think that's where we're still asking ourselves those questions of how does this look different in kindergarten versus fifth grade. A little bit of the challenges, we have 2 students at the kindergarten level with IEPs currently, and we have 11 at the fifth grade, at the fifth grade level. So that the amount of time that cross-categorical teacher needs to spend with that grade level is drastically different between the two, which then begs the question, are they both really co-teaching? So some of those are the questions we're asking ourselves. It's I think your data question is a good one of how do we compare those numbers and how do we quantify the impact at a grade level when it doesn't necessarily look identical at each of those grade levels. So one of the positive things we've talked about is the continued training and support that Fran has secured for us for next year. So we will continue to work with the same trainers that started with us this year so that they can continue to guide us through that as well. Because a lot of what they've done is shared. Other districts have measured success or lack thereof in these ways. But other districts, it doesn't necessarily look exactly the same. They have one teacher or two teachers working together all day in the exact same room. Ours doesn't look that way. So they're working with us to adapt some of that as well.
Flexibility.
Yeah.
So is there I understand waiting, it's a pilot and you don't want to roll it out completely to other schools and things, but it sounds like there are some definite successes. Is there a way to expand just certain things to other schools or
and some already are kind of informally
transitioning out of
So we had a staff member. We had a staff member from Blackberry Creek that joined the current training that was offered this year. There'll be additional training next year that other staff members at the elementary level are looking to take advantage of as well, so they can learn more about it.
And we did have the same presentation that was done at the after-school special ed PD session was done on April 2nd. It was optional for staff to sign up for a multitude of sessions, and this was one offering. And we did have Shields and Blackberry both have representation in there, asking lots of great questions. Can we, start this at this grade level? They're asking a lot of great questions. At Stewart, we've tried to be extremely transparent and open about these are the real positives we've seen. But there are challenges too in how we have one case manager that only works with 5th grade due to the number of needs at that grade level, and we have one staff member who works with 3 grade levels. That's extremely different to be co-planning and co-reflecting with 3 grade levels versus 1. That's a challenge we're still trying to figure out, and we also know it's a 1-year challenge. Those 5th graders are all moving on, and we don't have those high numbers at any other level, but we also don't know what kindergarten's bringing us. So there are things we're still trying to figure out. General education teachers are used to pulling students and working with them in a resource room with their curriculum. They're now pushing into multiple grade levels using general education curriculum that they are not yet experts in after the few months they've been doing it. So how does that truly become a partnership? We're still working on that. The benefit of having other staff members asking us questions, coming to observe us, attending these sessions is they're asking us these questions that we're still trying to figure out the answers to. So a little bit of the hesitation of saying everybody at the elementary is going to move forward with this is that we don't have all the answers yet. And not that we maybe ever will in education in general.
But we're working through them.
We are, especially in special education. Rarely is it ever one right thing. So we want to figure out exactly who is this right for and then support them in that way.
It seems like I think sometimes when we think about a pilot, it's a time-limited, I have a specific thing I want to test. I have a hypothesis, we're going to test it, we'll know if it works or not. This sounds more like you're looking at, and you spoke to sort of, this is another tool for the toolbox. There's different models that may work in different settings with different students and at different grade levels, and this is, so you're sort of navigating your way through that process right now. So I'm glad that there are some specific measurements that you are able to look at in terms of the individual's IEPs and then looking at the pre and post as far as that goes overall for the kids. But I don't know that this is going to necessarily produce
You said that so much more eloquently
an answer.
than I think I was. Yes.
But it seems like, as you were describing it, you're creating this range of options.
Yes.
And that this is yet another option that is an appropriate option to provide if we can figure out how to make it work. But you're also trying to measure it to know whether it has
Correct.
the downside.
And the reason that I think we're having the conversation with the school board, typically if a teacher wants to experiment with a new instructional technique in their classroom, we don't need to bring that to the board and seek permission to try something in that sense. But because there was a staffing impact when we did that, so just to remind you all, we did increase the number of cross-cat teachers at John Stewart from 2 to 3 and decrease 2 program assistants. And so moving forward, there would be then that staff consideration, that staff impact. And so part of it is that we're still figuring out, and has been successful this year, have we still been able to meet all of the needs that the 2 program aides had previously met with 1 additional case manager? That in and of itself has not been a problem, but that's also very, very, very student specific. So just because at John Stewart we are able to meet the needs without program assistance, I don't know that the needs of the other buildings are similar and that they could do that. So I think those are some of the conversations the other principals are asking. How do you meet this need? I don't have a student with that need currently. If I were to have one, then we would have to figure that out. But that's, I think, you said it very well, and why it's different is because there is a staffing impact that comes along with it.
Thank you.
Great job, Laura.
No, thank you. I mean, that's, you answered the questions that I had. So about a year from now, it seems like we'll hear about this again.
Hopefully before that, though,
Okay.
Certainly over the
because
summer.
if it does change and we look to move forward in the other 3 buildings, there will be a staffing impact that we do have to bring to you.
So it'd be in March, because March.
Because I can only imagine that we'll be in the same situation where it's got to be somewhat cost neutral. And that's what we were trying to do by offering this continuum of services for our students that was not at an additional cost.
One other technical question. The recommendation is to continue the pilot. Are we going to put a time period on that, or is it an indefinite?
Okay. It actually is something that was just a report, correct?
Right,
Because
because,
my minutes show we don't need to take any action.
No.
yeah,
I just assumed that if we had to vote on it on the consent agenda, we had to vote on it
in the
when
consent,
it's
it
off.
was under information, not for action. So while the memo does have a recommendation on it, the recommendation is not necessarily needed on the memo because it was an information item, not an action item. So we're okay moving forward with it as is.
Okay.
With the understanding that you want more.
Yes.
I got that for sure, so.
Thank you.
More for them.
I appreciate it.
Yes, certainly. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so that is the end of our new business.
So we
for
don't need
tonight.
we don't need a motion.
We do not.
Okay.
Thank you. So that was the new business. We'll move on now to the superintendent and board report.
Yep, last week we had a couple different committee meetings. First of all, we had CAC, and Mr. LePayton was there, and a couple of topics that we endeavored. Number one was student handbook changes. We had the same group that was here tonight, the same administrators was at CAC last week. They divided up into 3 groups and talked respectively on their age groups and any thoughts or concerns that they had. Talked about the budget reduction plan, so Dr. Fuchs came and reiterated where we're at and what we're trying to do with planned expenditures, and then also with school safety and summer projects. So we met. They also looked at new membership. There will be 5 or 6 new members with a couple members leaving, so I think CAC will stay at about the same amount, right at about 25. Mr. LePayton, was there anything else from the meeting you'd like to share?
No, as always, it's always good to hear the conversation. It's always good to hear the discussion and the comments, but no, nothing to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for attending. I don't want to do the Facilities Planning Committee update because I wasn't there and I don't want to take credit for it. So I know President Witt and Dr. Fuchs attended, so if you want to share some of those updates.
Yeah, Dr. Fuchs, you have an
Sure.
update, I'm sure. Yep.
Sure. The FPC went through the bylaws pretty in-depth, and we're going to do a little bit more homework and research and bring them back to the FPC in the fall at their September meeting. They're looking at changes in quorum, a little bit lower and consistent with CAC at 51%. They're looking at changes in officers, given that they only meet twice a year. They're thinking that they might be able to combine a couple of positions. And I think that's pretty much it for changes. They also spent some time talking, Mr. Payton was there with myself, about the summer projects that were approved tonight, and were supportive of our recommendation tonight. So, they asked good questions.
I think they also mentioned, I think you mentioned either President Witt or Dr. Fuchs, you mentioned that one of the things as part of their mission was to look at curriculum and the impact on furniture. So I met with Mr. Rice and Dr. Munn today, so they will be coming in October to talk about curriculum and
Facilities, more than just furniture, but space,
so kind
furniture,
of coupling facilities, with curriculum and what that can look like.
Yes, there you go, thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else?
They talked a lot about the challenge of, because it only meets twice a year, the challenge
Right.
of getting, filling the committee. It's a little more challenging than CAC and FAC, and I think it sounded as if they were interested in joining, the chairs of the CAC and FAC when they set up a table somewhere and actually try to, recruit new members, and then also being a little more proactive. Just with their membership committee and stuff like that, so.
I want to share with the board too that Aurora, the city of Aurora is starting an Aurora Education Commission. I'm going to read a little bit of it here. They will have 22 members, and they have invited a superintendent or designee from all of the Kane County schools, East Aurora, West Aurora, Indian Prairie, Batavia, Kaneland, and Oswego. So on next week on May 8th, I will be appointed as our representative. They're also looking at representatives from 5 private schools, 4 from institutions of higher education, 2 early childhood program representatives, and an Aurora alderman is going to be serving on it along with 2 businesses. So their goal is over a 10 to 15 year plan, take Aurora, that whole area, and work towards high schoolers from career or from school to career, school to community, kind of the same things we're doing with Kaneland 2020, but they're doing it Aurora-wide and anywhere that Aurora touches in all of those different communities. So I'll be going there, being appointed to that, and the valuable work that I can provide will be great, and then also some of the things that I can take from what the other districts are doing, I will make sure that I bring that back to our district also. Then 2 other things quickly. Our graduation, high school graduation, is May 20th. I know Mrs. Cesario should have sent out an email with dates and times. Robes, if you have any questions, feel free to contact Mrs. Cesario, or I'm happy to transfer any information to her for you, or Beth can also do that. Then the last thing I had, next Thursday, May 10th, sorry. Next Thursday, May 10th, is our next round of negotiations with Speak. So those are a couple of the reports that I had.
Do we know when parking and stuff like that will happen for graduation, when we'll get that?
I'll ask her. I'll put it in the weekly update this week when you should be receiving your parking. So I think there's usually a parking pass and a location of where we park around back.
It's usually about a week before. It's not very much in advance.
So at our first May board meeting?
Yeah, or even
the 14th.
The 14th?
Yeah, it'd have to be the first one because the second one, it's already over, so, yeah.
Maybe we'll have it in hand in your packets on the 14th.
Okay, sounds good plan. Did you have any?
I do. I have 2 reports. The first one is wow. We received a check from the Village of Elburn for impact fees in the amount of $84,297.32. That was $84,297.32. The impact fee money will be placed in Fund 21. That's the impact fee fund. The money will be used to help pay for the last couple payments of our debt certificates, which we have a payment in August and a payment in February, and those will be paid off. If you'll recall, those payments must come from operating dollars or from impact fees. And once those are paid off, that will be a good thing. So we're getting close. What were they for? The additions at John Stewart and John Shields, the west wings.
When those debt certificates are paid off, we still receive the impact fee money, so at some point...
Yes, we do, and then we'll have the money to use for other things. what I told somebody is that I need to check the law, because once they're paid for and we still collect impact fees, there are very specific things that you can do with that money, primarily buildings.
Okay.
But I don't know if it includes repairs. If it does, that would be helpful, but I need to find that out.
Okay.
So I know that you can use it for new things, but I'm not sure about fixing.
Okay.
So I will check into that once we get a little closer and have money. So the second thing is the state of Illinois did make their second of 4 categorical payments in a little over $1 million. So right now they're only 1 payment behind. On June 30th, there'll be 2 payments behind. But if they give us 1 more by August, that would be really helpful. So we'll keep our eye out for that payment, but at least we got, payment number 2. So I'm happy.
Great. Board members, anyone have anything? Okay. Topics for future agendas? Anyone got anything that's burning in their mind? Okay, if not, we'll move on to the second opportunity for public comment. The same rules as before apply, and the floor is now open. Are there any public comments? Yes.
My name's Ken Storgerson from Maple Park, Illinois.
Yes.
You know what, could you, because of the videotape, I know. Probably.
That's a first.
Okay. I'm sorry.
My name's Ken Thorgerson from Maple Park, Illinois. I've been a graduate of this school. My kids have. If I understood her presentation about the conference, there's kind of a deadline that they want. Did I misunderstand that about the I-8?
There's typically in public comment, there's not dialogue.
Oh, okay, all right, that's fine. All right, then, okay, that's fine. Then the other thing I think she said was the coaches recommended the I-8, so I think you guys should take that into strong consideration. Your staff wants that. The other thing I had, I've had 2 girls go through track, and you have a dress code now about the sports bra and that. If you've ever been to the Jill Holmes Invitational, and it's 80 degrees, I don't know how you're going to enforce that with the other schools coming in here. So that's all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Layden will follow up with you on your questions.
Okay, thank you.
Any other public comments? Okay, hearing none, we do have an executive session tonight. We will be discussing collective negotiating matters between the public body and its employees or their representatives, or deliberations concerning salary schedules for one or more classes of employees. When we reconvene in open session, there will be no action taken on the closed session items, so the recording will end when we go into executive session. So at this time, we are looking for a motion to go into executive session.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, and a roll call, please.
Mr. Carey?
Aye.
Mr. Lawler?
Aye.
Mr. LePayton?
Aye.
Mrs. Pavlak?
Aye.
Mrs. Barber?
Aye.
Mrs. Witt?
Aye. Motion carries 6-0, and the recording of tonight's meeting is now concluded.